For decades, game stories felt like glorified cutscenes, a simple narrative layer tacked onto the action, not the heart of the experience itself. But then a shift happened. Developers realized that interactivity was the key to unlocking true emotional depth in digital storytelling. This list celebrates the revolutionary single-player titles that dared to put narrative consequence, character psychology, and player choice above all else. Are you ready to see which 20 games completely redefined what a video game story could achieve? Let's jump straight into the first legends that truly rewrote the game universe. When we talk about the evolution of the video game narrative, The Last of Us isn't just a chapter, it's the entire textbook. It redefined the industry's standard for emotional storytelling, proving that a character-driven journey in a post-apocalyptic world could rival the best prestige television. Joel and Ellie's reluctant companionship, a grizzled survivor and a young girl who holds the key to humanity, was instantly iconic, forcing players to witness the ugly, morally gray side of survival. It wasn't about saving the world, it was about protecting her, and that intimate focus on their relationship is what made it so brutally resonant. The genius of its story is how it used gameplay mechanics to reinforce the narrative's themes. Every scavenged bullet, every desperate melee fight made you feel the scarcity and the constant threat that the world posed, grounding the emotional stakes in tangible survival loops. It's one thing to watch characters suffer, but it's another to be the character making those harrowing choices. And here's where it gets interesting. The game isn't afraid to make its hero Joel commit acts that blur the line between love and selfishness. The Last of Us forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the bad guy is the one we've been playing as the whole time. Its final, unforgettable sequence is a masterclass in ambiguity, leaving a haunting question about morality and unconditional love. It's an experience that showed the entire medium that a linear, tightly written script, combined with superb acting and motion capture, could deliver a gut-punch narrative that lasts a lifetime. If The Last of Us is a textbook on character, Red Dead Redemption 2 is an epic novel on atmosphere and consequence, setting a new benchmark for narrative scale. Arthur Morgan's story is one of the most tragic and profound character studies in all of entertainment, not just gaming. As you ride across the breathtaking, dynamic landscapes of the late 1890s, the game doesn't just tell you about the end of the outlaw era, it lets you live, breathe, and ultimately perish within it. The sheer density of detail in the world and the way the gang evolves or devolves around you creates a level of immersion that few titles can even aspire to. The narrative pacing is deliberately slow, which might put off some, but it's essential to the experience. It gives you time to bond with the van der Linde gang, making the eventual betrayals and heartbreaks feel earned, like losing members of your own family. You know that moment when you realize the camp is less about brotherhood and more about a narcissistic leader's delusion? That slow, inevitable decay is the core of the story's brilliance. The narrative's heavy focus on chores, hunting, and simple interactions grounds Arthur's transformation, showing rather than telling his internal conflict. But the true narrative innovation lies in the subtle choices and the game's powerful second act, forcing a reflection on Arthur's legacy. It's a story about finding humanity and redemption in the face of inevitable fate. Red Dead Redemption 2 proved that a story can be both massive and deeply personal, using a sprawling open world not for simple traversal, but as a silent, powerful character reflecting the passing of time and the slow, beautiful death of a way of life. Heavy Rain wasn't just a game, it was an experiment in interactive drama, a bold statement that the player's choices and failures could literally rewrite the script in real time. This title took the concept of the choose-your-own-adventure book and pushed it into a fully rendered, emotionally charged cinematic thriller. It made the player feel like a director and a participant simultaneously, blurring the line between cutscene and gameplay with its quick-time event-heavy structure. For the first time, failing a QTE didn't mean reloading a checkpoint. It meant a character died or the story took a dramatic permanent left turn. The game juggles 4 separate protagonists, each desperately seeking the origami killer, and the story's tension comes from the constant fear of failure. Trying to stop a character from drinking poison or choosing to chop off a finger, these were high-stakes, stomach-churning moments that leveraged the player's emotional investment. This structure was revolutionary, treating emotional consequence as the primary gameplay loop. And here's the game's core hook. Your version of the story is your version, often radically different from anyone else's playthrough. What Heavy Rain ultimately did was solidify a new genre, the cinematic choice-based narrative. It showed the power of permanent loss and the weight of moral compromises, giving every decision genuine, lasting gravity. It demonstrated that a game could function less like a test of skill and more like a high-tension moral puzzle, where the true measure of success is whether you can live with the consequences of your desperate actions. If the previous games used volumes of dialogue and dense character histories, Journey proved that a story could be devastatingly powerful using almost nothing at all. This game is a masterclass in minimalist storytelling, communicating a profound narrative of life, purpose, and connection without a single word of spoken or written text. The sweeping, emotional narrative is told entirely through visual design, movement, music, and the simple, shared experience between two players. The gameplay itself is a serene, beautiful movement toward a distant mountain, and the narrative is built on implicit themes rather than explicit plot points. The genius of Journey lies in its revolutionary approach to online interaction. It anonymously pairs you with another player, often mid-level, and gives you only one means of communication, a musical chime. This constraint forces a beautiful, pure form of non-verbal cooperation, sparking an instantaneous, wordless bond that transcends typical multiplayer anonymity. This quiet, shared pilgrimage demonstrated that connection and emotional payoff don't require complex dialogue trees or deep lore. They require vulnerability and shared purpose. The entire experience is a metaphor for the human condition, the shared struggle, the beautiful moments of fleeting connection, and the inevitable cycle of rebirth. Journey changed the conversation by showing that abstract, beautiful emotional storytelling can be the most potent narrative form of all. When Shadow of the Colossus was released, it shattered conventional storytelling rules by presenting a huge world with an implicit, often tragic narrative. The premise is starkly simple. You are Wander and you must kill 16 majestic, often gentle giants to save the woman you love. The story is told through the silence between the colossal battles and the desolate beauty of the landscape. There are no side quests, no towns, and almost no dialogue, just you, your horse aggro, and the increasingly heavy moral weight of your quest. The brilliance here is how the narrative is told through action. Each Colossus battle isn't just a boss fight, it's a monumental act of desecration. You aren't fighting monsters, you're slaying something sublime and ancient. The increasingly dark markings on Wander's body after each victory serve as a chilling physical manifestation of the price he is paying, transforming the player's goal, saving the girl into the source of their own moral corruption. This structure proved that a story can be incredibly powerful by withholding information and forcing the player to interpret the context and consequences. The game masterfully manipulates your perception. What starts as a heroic quest slowly morphs into a horrific, desperate act. Shadow of the Colossus is a landmark because its narrative power is derived from its minimalism, showing the profound impact of sacrifice and the tragic irony of love driving one to morally monstrous deeds. Forget jump scares and cheap horror tropes. Silent Hill 2 redefined the psychological horror narrative by making the setting itself a manifestation of the protagonist's tormented mind. This game's story isn't about a small town haunted by ghosts. It's about a man, James Sunderland, haunted by his own guilt and repressed memory, lured to a misty, deserted resort after receiving a letter from his deceased wife. The true genius lies in its deep, unsettling symbolism. Every creature, every location, and every unsettling radio static is a direct reflection of James's inner turmoil and fractured psyche. The game masters the art of atmosphere over action, creating a palpable sense of dread, where the lack of information is often more terrifying than what is explicitly shown. You know that moment when a horror game finally reveals the monster and it loses its power? Silent Hill 2 never loses its power because its central monster is emotional trauma. It forces the player to become an amateur psychologist, trying to piece together the truth while battling the manifestation of fear, sexual repression, and despair. This title permanently changed narrative design in horror by proving that symbolism and emotional depth are more effective than gore. The entire experience is a devastating slow burn towards one of gaming's most iconic and emotionally complex twists, where the journey of self-discovery is inextricably linked to the truth of the protagonist's past actions. It's a tragic, multi-layered story that rewards multiple playthroughs just to argue about which ending is truly canon. Mass Effect didn't just tell a story, it created a narrative universe where the player's history, choices, and relationships were the core mechanic of the experience. The central concept, the suicide mission, is arguably the single greatest narrative structure in RPG history. It's a literal mission where the outcome is entirely dependent on the quality of the crew you recruited, how loyal they are, and whether you assign the right person to the right job based on their specialized skills. Failure was a genuine, non-revisitable consequence of poor preparation. The entire game is a masterclass in character writing and relationship building. Every side quest felt meaningful because it deepened your connection to a squad mate, building the emotional capital needed for the final, terrifying gambit. And here's where it gets interesting. The game cleverly integrates choices made in the first game, making your current commander Shepard a walking archive of past decisions, proving that long-form, cross-game consequence was possible. While Mass Effect 2 was arguably the high point, the entire Mass Effect trilogy represents a foundational shift in how games approach long-form, galaxy-spanning narrative. This saga was a monumental promise kept that a player's choices, from the smallest dialogue option to the largest galactic decision, would actually carry forward across 3 massive games. Playing as Commander Shepard, you weren't just experiencing a story, you were building a deeply personal 6-year space opera. Was there ever a stronger commitment to player agency and consequential storytelling? This interconnected design set a new, almost impossible standard for cinematic RPGs. The narrative genius lies in its world building and character consistency. Each game forced you to cultivate relationships with a diverse, alien crew, and those relationships, along with the fate of entire species, depended on the moral compass you displayed. And here's where it gets interesting. The emotional weight of the trilogy peaked because death was permanent. If you lost a crewmate in the first game, they were gone for good, leaving a hole in your subsequent playthroughs that profoundly shaped the tone and available options of the sequels. The Mass Effect saga proved that video games could deliver a character-driven epic on the scale of Star Wars or Battlestar Galactica, yet make the player the sole author of its direction and its ultimate emotional cost. It validated the concept of the continuous narrative, where your Shepard felt like your Shepard, built on a mountain of hard-earned consequential decisions. This trilogy redefined the potential scope and emotional depth of interconnected gaming narratives. When Telltale released its take on The Walking Dead, it wasn't just another adventure game, it was a radical reinvention of interactive storytelling, proving that narrative tension could be driven entirely by moral dilemmas under immense time pressure. The story centers on Lee Everett and his bond with a young girl, Clementine, creating an emotional surrogate relationship that immediately hooked players. It expertly replaced complex puzzles with impossible choices, asking who do you save, or how much of your morality are you willing to sacrifice for survival? The engine of the narrative was the ticking clock during dialogue and decision-making. You rarely had time to deliberate, you had to react with your gut, and those hurried, messy decisions defined who you were in the world, and more importantly, how Clementine perceived you. The narrative innovation was realizing that perceived consequence is as powerful as actual consequence, even if the main plot points were fixed. The emotional journey and character relationships changed dramatically. The Walking Dead single-handedly popularized the modern episodic, choice-heavy narrative genre. It focused on the subtle, heartbreaking costs of survival in a world that had crumbled, proving that genuine tears and existential dread could be generated not by fighting zombies, but by protecting a child and facing the inevitable, devastating final choice of Lee's fate. On the surface, Spec Ops, the line looked like another generic military shooter, but that was the game's first and most brilliant narrative trap. This game is a searing piece of meta-commentary that directly subverts the military shooter genre, forcing players to confront the true psychological horror of war. Set in a sandstorm-devastated Dubai, the story slowly, brutally strips away the notion of heroism, showing the protagonist, Captain Walker, devolve into a state of delusion and moral decay. The genius is how the game weaponizes player expectation. Every narrative trope you've learned from games like Call of Duty, the clear enemy, the heroic objective, the moral certainty is progressively deconstructed and thrown back in your face. You know that moment when the game asks you to commit a horrific war crime and your only choice is to pull the trigger? The game doesn't let you off the hook. It forces you to acknowledge your complicity in the unfolding madness. Spec Ops. The line stands as a monumental achievement because it breaks the fourth wall of narrative morality. It asks, do you feel like a hero yet? It uses the act of playing a military game to tell a story about the impossibility of heroism in conflict, making the player uncomfortable not with gore, but with the moral weight of their own actions and assumptions. Bioshock Infinite took the philosophical depth of its predecessor and exploded it into a high-concept narrative about destiny, multiverses, and identity, set aboard the breathtaking, terrifying city of Columbia. The relationship between the jaded protagonist, Booker DeWitt, and the reality-bending Elizabeth is the engine of the story. Elizabeth's ability to tear open rifts into other realities wasn't just a cool gameplay gimmick, it was a direct narrative tool used to explore the game's core themes of choice, consequence, and the nature of self. The story starts as a rescue mission, but rapidly spirals into a mind-bending exploration of parallel realities and how the smallest choices can create infinite variations of a single life. The narrative excels by constantly shifting your understanding of the characters' pasts and motivations. The stunning visual presentation of Columbia, a bright, beautiful facade covering a dark, violent underbelly, perfectly mirrors the complexity of the philosophical issues at play. Ultimately, the game's finale is a famous piece of complex narrative design, utilizing its multiverse concept to deliver a massive, looping twist that demands serious contemplation. By using the sheer power of concept and the lighthouse man-city metaphor, Bioshock Infinite proved that big-budget shooters could deliver stories that felt less like action films and more like thought experiments, forever changing the ambition of AAA game writing. Uncharted 2 is the game that proved blockbusters didn't have to sacrifice sophisticated pacing and witty dialogue for spectacle. Nathan Drake's second outing set a cinematic benchmark for third-person action games, treating its narrative structure less like a video game plot and more like a Hollywood adventure film starring a genuinely charming cast. The game's story felt constantly in motion, expertly balancing high-octane set pieces with quieter, character-focused moments, a narrative feat rarely achieved at the time. The true narrative innovation lies in its brilliant pacing and transitions. The game opens with Drake, injured and bloody, dangling from a train wrecked on a cliff, a masterful way to hook the player immediately into a desperate scenario, and then utilize a non-linear flashback structure to explain how he got there. This immediate sense of peril, combined with the natural, often humorous banter between Drake, Elena, and Chloe, gave the story an effortless, dynamic energy. The dialogue didn't feel like filler, it was a genuine extension of the characters' relationships. By blending cinematic camera work, naturalistic performances, and seamless shifts between quiet exploration and explosive action, Uncharted 2 showed that a story could maintain a relentless, high-energy pace without sacrificing character depth. It redefined how action-adventure narratives were structured, making every chapter feel like a perfectly edited sequence from a summer tentpole movie, a style that influenced countless games that followed. Alan Wake dared to ask what if the story was the enemy. This psychological thriller delivered a uniquely compelling narrative experience by embedding the horror, not just in the environment, but through the protagonist's own craft, playing as a writer whose fiction is literally coming to life to terrorize him. The game utilizes a compelling story within a story framework, making the line between reality and the written word intentionally blurry. The narrative structure mimics a television series, divided into episodes with opening recaps and cliffhanger endings, a stylistic choice that heightened the sense of tension and mystery week to week or session to session. And here's where it gets interesting. The manuscript pages that Alan is supposedly writing are scattered throughout the world, providing clues, foreshadowing events, and sometimes even describing the very moment you are currently playing, making the player question the nature of free will versus predestined narrative. Alan Wake proved that a story could be deeply meta and self-aware without becoming gimmicky. Its use of unreliable narration and a literary atmosphere complete with internal monologues that frame the action showed that integrating the act of storytelling into the core gameplay loop could create a narrative that was far more immersive and psychologically intense than traditional horror. Building on the foundation of interactive drama, Beyond Two Souls experimented with narrative structure by presenting its story in a completely non-linear, fragmented fashion, guided primarily by emotional tone. It chronicles 15 years in the life of Jodie Holmes, a young woman connected to a mysterious incorporeal entity named Aiden. The true power of the narrative came from the game's willingness to jump back and forth dramatically in time, throwing the player into different, often unrelated moments of Jodie's life, from childhood to adulthood, from moments of vulnerability to moments of intense action. This fragmented structure wasn't arbitrary. It was designed to reflect Jodie's emotional and psychological state, forcing the player to piece together her timeline and understand the slow, cumulative impact of her extraordinary existence. Playing as Jodie and often as Aiden, the narrative makes you experience her isolation, her fear, and her attempts to find connection in a world that views her as an anomaly. Beyond Two Souls was a bold statement about how narrative flow could prioritize character emotion and thematic resonance over chronological order. It was essentially a series of vignettes tied together by the evolving trauma and growth of its central character, demonstrating that a story could be profoundly affecting even if the pieces were delivered out of sequence, relying on the player's memory and empathy to complete the emotional puzzle. Firewatch took narrative minimalism to the vast wilderness, proving that a compelling, deeply human story could be told with just 2 voices and a radio. Set in the Wyoming wilderness, the game focuses entirely on the relationship between Henry, a fire lookout, and Delilah, his supervisor in another tower, communicating only via walkie-talkie. The entire emotional engine of the game is driven by their dialogue, witty, vulnerable, and incredibly realistic. The narrative innovation here is the commitment to dialogue and relationship development as the primary gameplay interaction. As Henry explores the beautiful, often unsettling environment, the choices the player makes and how Henry responds to Delilah shape the tone, intimacy, and ultimately the reality of their relationship. The beauty of the story is in the unspoken things, the reason Henry took the job, Delilah's guarded past, and the slow, inevitable reality of their separation. It is a masterclass in building tension through intimacy, using the physical isolation of the setting to highlight the emotional connection. You know that moment when you realize the grand mystery you're chasing isn't the real story? Firewatch uses a sense of growing paranoia and an external mysteries as a clever narrative device to explore themes of escape, grief, and the struggle for genuine human connection. Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons stands as a narrative landmark because its story is inextricably woven into its mechanical design, a concept known as ludo-narrative integration. The player controls 2 brothers simultaneously, using the left stick for the older brother and the right stick for the younger. This dual control scheme immediately establishes the codependent relationship and the distinct personalities of the siblings. The older brother is strong and can interact with heavy objects. The younger brother is small and can slip through tight spaces. The entire journey, an emotionally charged quest to save their sick father, is a silent lesson in cooperation, loss, and growth. As the brothers face obstacles, the player is forced to make the 2 hands work together, literally embodying their fraternal bond. The unique controls are not a gimmick, they are the language of the narrative, constantly reinforcing the theme of partnership. The narrative reaches its devastating, famous climax when the older brother is lost, and the younger brother must complete the final stretch of the journey alone. At this moment, the game forces the player to control the younger brother using the stick previously assigned to the older brother, creating a powerful, tactile moment of maturation and sorrow. This simple, genius mechanical change speaks volumes about grief and independence, proving that gameplay controls can be the most potent storytelling device. Bastion is a monumental achievement in narrative design because it introduced the world to the dynamic, real-time narrator. This wasn't just a voiceover. The narrator, Rux, commented on the player's actions as they happened, reacting to everything from the discovery of new weapons to the player falling off a cliff. This immediacy created an unprecedented feeling of being actively watched and having your legend chronicled in real time, making the story feel organic and intensely personal. The plot follows the kid attempting to rebuild the titular Bastion after a catastrophe known as the Calamity. The narrative strength lies in its ability to weave lore, character backstories, and deep emotional themes into the very structure of the game world. Every piece of dialogue provided context, making the act of playing the game indistinguishable from the act of storytelling. The world literally built itself beneath the kid's feet as he moved, a beautiful metaphor for rebuilding and remembrance. What Bastion proved was the power of the narrator as an active character, influencing the player's perception and emotional investment. The game culminates in a powerful moral choice regarding the fate of the broken world, a moment made infinitely heavier by the deep emotional connection the dynamic narration had forged. It forever changed how independent games approach narrative voice and seamless integration. This title is a revolutionary anthology of micro-stories, a game that redefined how a narrative can use a fragmented structure to explore the profound theme of family lineage and mortality. The player, Edith, explores her sprawling, impossibly strange family home, and with each discovered room, they relive the final moments of a deceased family member through unique, highly stylized gameplay vignettes. The genius of Edith Finch lies in its inventive mechanical diversity. Each death is treated as a self-contained short story, with its own art style and gameplay loop, from transforming into animals to working in a cannery and letting your imagination run wild. This constantly shifting perspective keeps the player off balance and utterly captivated, demonstrating that every life, no matter how short or strange, deserves its own unique narrative treatment. And here's where it gets interesting. The house itself becomes a character, with hidden passages and architectural eccentricities that physically reflect the family's strange history and secrets. What Remains of Edith Finch is a beautiful, melancholic experience that proved a game could be a collection of brilliant narrative ideas, held together by a single, powerful emotional thread about the inevitability and beauty of death. Life is Strange ushered in a new era of adolescent, emotional storytelling by blending relatable, slice-of-life drama with a compelling science fiction mechanic, the ability to rewind time. Playing as Max Caulfield, a photography student, the player's power to undo recent decisions becomes the central dilemma, forcing them to constantly weigh the consequences of choice against the perceived benefit of altering the past. The narrative focuses intensely on the deep, messy bond between Max and her childhood friend Chloe Price. The story's emotional resonance comes from the everyday details, navigating high school politics, feeling alienation, and investigating a dark mystery within the small town of Arcadia Bay. The time rewind mechanic cleverly allows the player to explore different conversational paths, but it always leaves a haunting question. You know that moment when you fix one mistake but create a ripple effect of new problems? This game proved that a strong narrative could leverage emotional vulnerability, real-world issues, and a supernatural element to create a deeply engaging story about friendship, consequence, and destiny. The ultimate emotional payoff forces a devastating final choice that truly tests the player's investment in the characters, making Life is Strange a landmark in choice and consequence narratives. Undertale is the ultimate example of meta-narrative, a game whose story is conscious of the player and their actions, subverting years of RPG conventions. The premise is simple: you fall into a world of monsters, and you can choose to fight them or spare them. The truly revolutionary element is that the game remembers your choices, and the characters react not just to your immediate actions, but to your entire history of playthroughs. The narrative genius is found in the pacifist, neutral, and genocide routes. If you choose to kill a single monster, the game comments on your violent tendencies. If you play the genocide route, the game becomes actively hostile and judgmental, punishing the player for their actions and mocking the tropes they're attempting to exploit. It famously broke the fourth wall by having characters address the player, not the protagonist, using your save file as part of the story's history. Undertale changed the game by treating the player's intent as the core narrative driver. It challenged the expectation that video game violence is consequence-free, turning the game into a philosophical debate about empathy and morality. It proved that a simple-looking, independent game could deliver one of the most intellectually stimulating and emotionally profound narratives ever created. To the Moon is a beautiful, devastating narrative experience that strips away almost all traditional gameplay mechanics to focus entirely on storytelling and emotional delivery. The game follows two scientists who dive into the memories of a dying man, Johnny, to fulfill his final wish to go to the moon. The story is told by traversing Johnny's memories in reverse chronological order, slowly piecing together a lifelong narrative of tragedy, loss, and profound connection. The innovation here is the absolute commitment to the narrative as this singular objective. There are minimal puzzles, but they only serve as a means to move the story along, never to impede it. The game operates more like an interactive movie or a visual novel, showing that a story about memory, regret, and the nature of happiness can be completely immersive without complex combat or inventory systems. The brilliance lies in its ability to handle extremely heavy themes: autism, childhood trauma, and the complex nature of romantic love with sensitivity and wit. You know that moment when a small piece of dialogue suddenly gives context to an entire life? To the Moon is packed with those moments, using simple pixel graphics and a magnificent soundtrack to deliver one of the most emotionally devastating and highly praised stories in gaming history, validating the power of narrative purity. So there you have it, 20 single-player games that didn't just entertain us, they fundamentally altered how we think about narrative design in our medium. Whether it was through shattering the fourth wall, weaponizing grief, or rewriting the rules of time itself, these titles proved games are an unparalleled engine for emotional connection. Which of these legends gave you the biggest emotional gut punch, and which other narrative innovators should we feature next time? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more lists designed to find the true storytellers in gaming. There's always another unforgettable adventure waiting to change the way you see the world.